The day Emma Callahan lost her job at the Pine Hollow Public Library, a certified letter was already waiting in her mailbox, postmarked from Denver and creased at the corners like it had been through a long journey. She held it in her hands for a moment, hesitating on the edge of the porch, while Benji played with a half-deflated soccer ball in the yard. The Colorado wind tugged at her cardigan. The sun was setting slow behind the hills, casting a honey-orange glow over everything that felt so unfairly still. Inside the envelope was the last thing she expected, a formal notice from the law firm of Harper Dunn & Avery, informing her that she had inherited a property in Stone Creek, Colorado, from her recently deceased mother, Eliza Callahan. The details were sparse: a parcel of land with an abandoned farmhouse, roughly 60 acres of what was described only as mixed terrain. No mention of value, no sentiment, just black ink on ivory paper. She reread the letter 3 times before setting it down. Her mother hadn't spoken much about Stone Creek. In fact, the name only rang a vague bell, something mentioned once or twice in passing during long silences or over a cracked cup of coffee. But what struck Emma most was the closing line. Included in the property transfer is the contents of the main residence, as well as a safety deposit box key. Handle with care. Eliza wanted it that way. The next morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table with a cup of stale coffee, staring at the manila folder the lawyer had overnighted with more details. A basic land deed, a crude hand-drawn map in fading ink, and a yellowed note in her mother's handwriting. There are things worth more than what they seem. Some truths don't glitter, but they endure. Don't let them bury it twice. By Thursday, she was in her beat-up Subaru with Benji asleep in the back seat, and everything they owned packed into 4 plastic totes and a milk crate of books. They crossed into the foothills by noon, and by late afternoon, the road narrowed into gravel, and finally into a 1-lane dirt track marked with a rusted sign, Callahan Ridge, private property. The house sat like a forgotten relic at the end of the drive, a 2-story log cabin with warped shutters, its wooden planks sun-bleached to the color of old bones. The front porch sagged in the middle. The wind rattled the loose gutters. Emma parked the car and stepped out, her boots crunching against gravel and dried pine needles. "This is it?" Benji asked, rubbing his eyes as he climbed out. "It looks haunted." Emma let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. "It might be, but it's ours." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of thyme, dust, dry wood, and something faintly medicinal. The living room was mostly empty except for a moth-eaten armchair and a stone fireplace with a cracked mantel. Her mother's old sewing machine sat in a corner, covered in plastic like it had been waiting. They set up camp in what had once been the study. Emma laid out their sleeping bags on the wooden floor, lit the old kerosene lamp she found in a crate by the door, and tried to feel something, nostalgia, warmth, anything. But mostly, she felt the kind of silence that comes when you return to a place you never expected to call home. It was on the 3rd day, while clearing out the upstairs bedroom, that she found the drawer in her mother's writing desk. She'd nearly missed it, a false bottom, cleverly fitted beneath a row of empty envelopes and faded receipts. Using the edge of a butter knife, she pried it up gently and discovered a slim black folder tied with faded red string. Inside was a more detailed version of the map from the folder, this one hand-drawn with contour lines and landmarks: North Tree Ridge, South Slope Well, Old Cedar Line. Taped to the inside cover was a photo of her mother as a young woman standing in front of the same house, only back then it had a working fence and a garden bed in bloom. On the back of the photo, written in Eliza's careful cursive, were the words, "Find what's beneath." They never did, and they tried. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, heart beating louder than the wind outside. There had always been things unspoken between them, things that made Eliza's silences feel heavier than most people's words. And now, staring at the map, at the notes, at the barely veiled warning, Emma felt something stir inside her, not just curiosity, but a kind of defiant pull. That night, as coyotes yelped in the distance and the fire in the stone hearth flickered low, she stared at the map spread out on the floor between her and Benji. Her son, head on her lap, was already half asleep. She traced the faded ink with her finger, stopping at a marked X near the base of something called Juniper Root Hill. This isn't just some rundown patch of dirt, she whispered. There was history here, secrets, maybe even something worth remembering. And for the first time since arriving, Emma didn't feel lost. She felt chosen, and she wasn't going anywhere. The morning after a cold front swept down from the Rockies, Emma Callahan stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in soapy water, watching frost melt from the porch railing. The old farmhouse creaked and popped as the sun warmed its joints, and from outside, the distinct sound of a child's laughter echoed up from the backyard. Benji had taken to roaming the grounds, like an explorer charting a forgotten continent. With a walking stick he insisted was a treasure finder, he'd been tracing invisible paths across the overgrown backyard for the past hour. Emma didn't worry. The land was quiet, remote, and oddly peaceful, if not a little mysterious. She was drying her hands when Benji's voice rang out, sharper this time. "Mom, you have to see this." She grabbed her jacket and jogged outside, boots sinking slightly into the thawing soil as she followed the sound of her son's voice to the far edge of the yard. There, behind a twisted old oak whose trunk split into 3 massive roots, Benji was crouched in the dirt, his hands muddy and his eyes wide. Emma slowed as she approached. "Did you fall?" "No," he said, holding something up. "Look." In his hand was a stone, irregular, about the size of a plum. It shimmered oddly in the sunlight, flashes of violet and silver streaking through its surface like veins beneath skin. She took it from him carefully, turning it over. It wasn't like any rock she'd seen before. It felt heavier than it looked. "Where did you find it?" she asked. "Right under the root," Benji said, pointing to a shallow hole beneath the tree. "I was digging for bugs." Emma knelt, brushing aside the loose dirt. The hole was about 8 inches deep. The root arched like a broken arm above it, and embedded in the earth around it were more small fragments, gray but glinting faintly. She didn't say anything right away. Something about the stone. It wasn't just pretty. It felt important, out of place, or maybe exactly in place. That afternoon, unable to shake the feeling, Emma wrapped the stone in a towel and placed it gently into an old tin lunchbox, then loaded Benji into the car and headed into town. Pine Hollow wasn't exactly a hub of scientific activity, but there was one person she thought of instantly, Mr. Abel, the old clocksmith who ran the town's repair shop. He was eccentric, yes, but known for his obsession with magnification lenses, old instruments, and all things shiny. If anyone could help her figure out what the stone was, it was him. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped inside. The air smelled like oil and thyme. Mr. Abel looked up from behind a magnifying visor, the lenses making his eyes comically large. "Emma Callahan," he said, adjusting the visor. "Didn't expect to see you back in town so soon." "I didn't expect to be," she replied with a smile, "but I've got something I was hoping you could take a look at." She placed the wrapped stone gently on the counter. Mr. Abel unwrapped it and let out a low whistle. "Well now, that's no ordinary river rock." He reached beneath the counter, pulling out a velvet cloth and laying the stone on top. Then, with practiced care, he selected a small jeweler's loupe from a tray and leaned in. "Unusual coloration," he murmured. "Internal fracturing, but not quartz. No, and not just mica either. There's depth here." He adjusted the lens again. "Is that iridescence? Strange. This almost looks like spodumene, but not the clean type. There's something else in here." Emma furrowed her brow. "Spodu what?" "Spodumene. It's a lithium-bearing mineral. But this isn't typical. There's something else here, something denser, almost metallic." He straightened up and removed the loupe. "Emma, this might be beyond my pay grade. If you're serious about identifying it, there's someone you should talk to." She blinked. "Who?" "Charlie Foster. Used to be a senior geologist for one of the mining companies before they collapsed in the early 2000s. Retired out past Raven Ridge. Bit of a recluse now, but sharp as ever when it comes to the land. If anyone can tell you what you got, it's him." Emma hesitated. "Will he talk to me?" "Depends on the day. But if you tell him you found something under a tree root in Stone Creek, I imagine he'll be curious enough." An hour later, after a short phone call and a promise not to bring a camera crew, Emma found herself driving west with Benji in the back seat, the stone still wrapped in cloth on the dashboard. The road climbed in slow coils up the hills toward a modest cabin tucked behind a stand of ponderosa pines. Charlie Foster answered the door in flannel and denim, hair gray and wind-tossed, eyes sharp and skeptical. He looked past Emma and down to Benji, then back to the lunchbox in her hand. "Let me guess," he said. "You're the one who found the purple rock." Emma held it out. "My son found it. I just got curious." Charlie took the stone and examined it beneath the outdoor light. He said nothing for a long moment, then motioned them inside. His cabin was cluttered but orderly, books stacked by discipline, rocks labeled and shelved like museum specimens. He pulled out a portable spectrometer and a handheld microscope, adjusting the dials as he worked in silence. Then, finally, he looked up. "This isn't just spodumene," he said. "There's lithium, yes, but also traces of tantalum and another mineral I haven't seen in this composition before. Old Earth material, possibly Precambrian. If you pulled this out of a tree root in Stone Creek." He trailed off, frowning at the readings. Emma leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Charlie looked up. "It means there's a chance, just a chance, that you're sitting on a very old, very rare mineral deposit. Lithium is one thing, but tantalum, that's used in electronics, capacitors. It's rare and expensive. This combination, especially with the way it's formed, could indicate a hydrothermal system that cooled very slowly, allowing complex mineralization." Emma blinked. "So, there's more of this?" "Possibly, maybe a lot more, but I'd need to survey the area. You said it came from under a tree?" "Yes, an oak in our backyard." Charlie rubbed his beard. "You mind if I come out tomorrow and take a look?" Emma nodded. "Not at all. Please do." As she and Benji drove home, the lunchbox back in her lap, the land around her seemed different, like it was watching her now, waiting. She didn't know exactly what she and her son had stumbled onto beneath that ancient tree, but something told her that this was only the beginning, and that the ground under their feet might hold secrets far older and far more valuable than anyone had ever guessed. The morning air over Stone Creek hung heavy with fog, clinging low to the dirt paths and pine branches, like something reluctant to let go. Emma stood on the back porch of the farmhouse with a thermos of coffee in her hands, watching as Charlie Foster wandered slowly around the old oak tree where Benji had discovered the strange violet stone. He carried a metal detector in one hand and a spiral-bound field notebook in the other, occasionally stopping to kneel and jot down observations. Charlie had spent the better part of the previous afternoon studying the mineral sample under a spectrometer in his cabin. His tone had shifted from curiosity to quiet intensity the moment he saw the readouts. This morning, he'd arrived at the farm with a pack full of tools and a request. "I need to know if this is a fluke, or if your land is sitting on something big." Emma hadn't been able to sleep. The stone, the map, her mother's cryptic note. It was as if her world had pivoted overnight from quiet survival to the first pages of something deeper, older, and infinitely more complicated. That afternoon, while Emma organized files in the kitchen and Charlie continued surveying, there was a knock at the front door. She wasn't expecting anyone. On the other side stood a young woman with a red scarf and a press badge clipped to her denim jacket. Her dark curls were wind-tousled, her cheeks pink from the chill. "You're Emma Callahan?" she asked. Emma nodded slowly. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled warmly. "I'm Maggie Brooks. I write for the Stone Creek Echo. I heard you've been doing some geological work on the property. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Emma hesitated. "I'm not really sure what there is to say. My son found a weird rock. That's about it." Maggie's expression turned a shade more serious. "I'm not here to write a story, not yet anyway. I think we may have overlapping interests. 20 years ago, Sierra Minerals was quietly drilling around this region, technically just outside of permitted zones. They were sanctioned once, but a lot of the records vanished when the parent company folded. I've been trying to uncover what really happened ever since." Emma opened the door a little wider. Inside, over coffee that had gone lukewarm, Maggie laid out what she knew. Back in the early 2000s, Sierra conducted a series of exploratory studies. No permits, no environmental reviews, just bulldozers and hush money. A few locals raised alarms, but those people either got bought out or shut up. Emma frowned. Why come to me? Because I heard through the county clerk's office that you brought samples into town, and I've been following Charlie Foster's work since before he vanished into the woods. Emma exchanged a look with Charlie, who had just stepped into the kitchen, dusty and windblown, holding a plastic sample bag. He set it gently on the table. I've been comparing some of the rock formations out back to an old mining registry I kept from my time with Copper Range Resources, he said, addressing both women. And I'll be damned if the coordinates don't match a set of fault lines Sierra once surveyed and then scrubbed. Maggie pulled out her iPad, tapping quickly until she found a faded PDF of an original Sierra Minerals exploration document dated 2003. She rotated it to face Charlie. I found this buried in the environmental archives at the University of Colorado, page 12. Look at the overlay. Charlie scanned it, then opened his own notebook and flipped to a sketched topographic profile. They're identical, but this map's been altered. Look here. Ridge elevation's been flattened, and the mineral indices are missing. Emma leaned in. Why would they change the elevation? To hide mappable signatures of subsurface anomalies, Maggie answered. If you remove the geological peaks, the heat signatures don't trigger external review. It makes the whole site look unremarkable. Emma exhaled slowly. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her memory, soft, distant, and laced with caution. There are things worth more than what they seem, and some truths they'll try to bury twice. What if my mother knew? She said quietly. What if she found something, and that's why she held on to this place all these years, even after leaving it? Charlie nodded. It would explain the note she left in the desk, and why she never sold the land, even when she couldn't afford to keep the house up. Maggie's eyes narrowed. Then we need to dig deeper. Literally and figuratively. The official geological files won't help us, but the university might still have the raw scans archived offline. I've got a contact in the geology department. If we can get into their restricted archive, we might be able to find the original unedited documents. Emma didn't even blink. Let's go. They left Benji with Charlie's neighbor, an older woman who ran a goat farm and was delighted to host the little adventurer. By dusk, the trio was in Boulder, walking through the dimly lit basement level of the University of Colorado's Earth Sciences building. Maggie led the way with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Her contact, a grad student named Theo, met them outside the records vault and swiped them in using his ID badge. I'm technically not allowed to give you access to these, he said nervously, but I hate what those companies did to my granddad's land. Inside the archive room, rows of filing cabinets stretched back like a labyrinth. Theo handed them a hard drive. The original satellite data was compressed and moved to analog backup after 2010. But the geoimaging files from 1999 to 2004 are still on here. You'll want the subfolder marked S-RR74. That's the zone that covers Stone Creek. Back at a campus terminal, Charlie opened the files, his eyes scanning rapidly. Here, before and after. On the screen were two versions of the same map. The earlier one showed concentrated mineral density beneath what now matched the Callahan land. The later version, scrubbed clean, looked like nothing but granite and clay. They erased an entire fault line, Charlie said, stunned. Not erased, Emma corrected. Buried. Maggie sat back, face pale. They knew. 20 years ago they knew. And they hid it. Charlie clicked through more files. Not just hid it. They falsified public geological reports and redrew land survey records. That's criminal. Emma's hands trembled slightly on the edge of the desk. My mother tried to warn someone. She must have. That's why she kept the map. Why she never told me. She knew it was dangerous. Outside, snow began to fall in soft flurries, dusting the quad and settling into the creases of statues and stairwells. Inside, the three of them stared at the screen in silence, until Charlie said, "We need to document this. Print copies. Back it all up. If Sierra Minerals buried this once, they'll try again." Emma looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the terminal. Something had changed in her. She wasn't just a woman cleaning out her mother's house anymore. She was a daughter, standing on the edge of something vast and unfinished. They didn't count on someone coming back, she said, and this time they wouldn't get to bury the truth. It started with a knock, not the kind that belonged to neighbors or delivery men. This one was precise. 3 short raps, crisp and deliberate. Emma froze mid-sentence as she helped Benji with his science worksheet at the kitchen table. She wasn't expecting anyone, and neither was Charlie, who had left just that morning with Maggie to cross-reference more geological data at the university. She opened the door cautiously. A man in a gray wool coat and pressed slacks stood on the porch, shoes too clean for Stone Creek mud. His smile was polite but rehearsed, and he held a leather folder, like it was an extension of his handshake. "Ms. Callahan?" he asked. "Yes?" "My name is Daniel Ridge. I represent a private investment firm based in Denver. I'm here to inquire about a potential land acquisition." Emma's eyes narrowed. "You're about 20 years too late for that kind of interest out here." "I assure you," Ridge said smoothly, "our interest is both recent and sincere. My client is prepared to make a generous offer, $30,000 for the property in full." Emma almost laughed. 30,000 for 12 acres of dry pasture and an old house without central heat? County records had valued the property at $500, more as a courtesy than anything else. "You do realize that's over 60 times the market value," she said carefully. Ridge smiled. "We believe the land has potential, possibly for ecotourism or alternative energy investment. My client simply wishes to secure the area before the potential is more broadly recognized." "Your client doesn't have a name?" Emma asked, stepping just slightly into the doorway, arms crossed. He hesitated. "Let's say the firm has interest in several parcels in the Stone Creek area. You wouldn't be the only one receiving an offer." Emma wasn't buying it. There was no movement in Stone Creek without purpose, and this man had the slick air of someone too far from farmland to speak about it honestly. "I'm not selling," she said flatly. "Not today. Not for 30,000. Not for 100. Daniel Ridge looked genuinely surprised for a split second before composing himself again. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a card. It was unbranded, just a phone number and his name. "In case you change your mind." She closed the door without replying. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table long after Benji went to bed, staring at the card. A stranger offering her enough money to pay off every debt she had, and then some, within days of Charlie's findings? It wasn't coincidence. Someone knew what lay under her land. She didn't know who exactly, not yet, but she had a sinking feeling she would soon. The next day, word reached Wyatt Harrington in Denver through a discreet phone call. The landowner had refused. Not only had she refused the generous initial offer, but she had asked no questions, hadn't even pretended to entertain negotiation. That annoyed him. Most people stalled long enough to name their price. The stubborn ones were dangerous. "Stone Creek," he murmured, standing in front of the expansive glass window in his 22nd floor corner office. "What is it about that damn place that keeps circling back?" His assistant, Laura, poked her head in. "The quarterly board packet is ready, sir." "Cancel the 3 o'clock, he said. She blinked. "But you're scheduled to present—" I said cancel it. Reschedule for next week. I'll be out of town this afternoon. By dusk, a black Escalade rolled silently into the parking lot of a quiet diner on the outskirts of Raven Ridge, 15 miles west of Emma's farm. Raven Ridge had 1 motel, 2 gas stations, and a diner that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the 70s. Inside, Emma sat alone in a corner booth with a paper cup of chamomile tea, waiting for Maggie to arrive. The plan had been to review the old environmental permits together, but when the bell over the front door rang, it wasn't Maggie who walked in. It was him. The man had the kind of presence that preceded him. Tall, composed, wearing a camel-colored coat and black leather gloves. His hair was salt and pepper, slicked back with intention. He didn't look at the menu, didn't scan the room. His eyes found Emma instantly, like he already knew exactly where she'd be. "Ms. Callahan," he said, removing his gloves slowly. "I'm Wyatt Harrington." Emma's body tensed. So this was it. The man behind the silence, the pressure, the scrubbed maps and forgotten files. He sat across from her without asking. "I hear you've inherited some stubbornness," he said with a smooth chuckle. "Must run in the family." "I'm sorry, have we met before?" "Number. But I knew your mother." Eliza was a thoughtful woman, sharp, principled. He leaned forward slightly. Sometimes too principled for her own safety. Emma said nothing. "I understand you've recently been exploring the land she left you, finding things, curious things." "What I find on my land is my business," she said evenly. "Indeed," Wyatt said, folding his hands on the table, "but sometimes digging too deep can stir up things better left buried." There it was, the threat beneath the civility. Emma smiled slightly. "Funny. That's not what the county records say. Seems the land's mine to dig." Wyatt didn't blink. "Let me be direct, Ms. Callahan. What you're sitting on may be more than you realize, but the complications, legal, environmental, financial, are greater than any single person should have to face alone. I'd like to help you avoid that burden." "With a check?" she asked. "With clarity," he said. "I'd advise you to take the offer you received yesterday. It was fair, more than fair, and it comes with no strings, if accepted quickly." Emma stared at him. "And if I don't?" Wyatt paused, choosing his words. "Your mother held on to that land a long time. She could have sold it, but she didn't. Not because it had value, she didn't know how much, but because she thought no one else would dig. She was wrong." "She knew," Emma said quietly. "That's why she kept it. That's why she never told me. She didn't trust people like you." Wyatt's smile faded. "Then maybe she should have buried it deeper." He stood, pulling on his gloves. "Don't make this personal, Ms. Callahan. It's just land, dirt, and rock. There are ways to get it. The question is how loud or quiet that process has to be." Emma didn't respond. He placed a small envelope on the table before walking out. Inside, when she finally opened it, was a revised offer, $75,000. No signatures, no paperwork, just a phone number. And beneath it, in tidy handwriting, "Before this gets messy." She folded the paper slowly, tucked it back in the envelope, and stared out the window toward the rising mountains beyond Raven Ridge. It wasn't just land anymore. It was a line. And she had just decided which side of it she stood on. The early morning air at the Callahan farm was sharp and clear, the kind that prickled your skin even beneath a flannel shirt. Frost shimmered faintly over the dry grass, crunching softly beneath Charlie Foster's boots as he approached the third drill site. 3 orange flags marked the test locations they had carefully selected over the last 2 days. The first had yielded nothing but layered shale. The second, however, had shown early promise. Traces of lithium-bearing spodumene glittered faintly under the light of Charlie's portable spectrometer. But it was the third site, on a slope just behind the gnarled oak tree, that had him tightening his grip on the drill rig with anticipation. "Ready?" he asked Emma, who stood a few feet away holding Benji's hand. She nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The small diesel engine growled to life, shaking the ground slightly as the core drill began its descent into the earth. Emma held her breath. With every whir of the bit cutting through bedrock, something in her gut coiled tighter. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then finally. Charlie stopped the rig and leaned over the exposed core sample. Carefully, he lifted the cylindrical casing and slid the extracted earth out into a lined tray. His face tightened. "What is it?" Emma asked, stepping forward. Charlie turned the tray toward her. Embedded in the otherwise gray column of bedrock were flecks, iridescent, pale, greenish-white and glassy, spodumene unmistakably. But there was more. Fine veins of metallic shimmer weaving through it like threads of moonlight. "Tantalum," Charlie whispered, "or something damn close to it." Emma blinked. "I thought tantalum only showed up in trace amounts, mostly in Africa." "It's extremely rare in the US, Charlie said, "and never this pure. This right here is almost surgical grade, could be worth a fortune to electronics manufacturers, especially combined with spodumene. This isn't just valuable, Emma. This is a strategic resource." Emma looked at him. Are we talking hundreds of thousands? Charlie shook his head. We could be talking millions. Benji's eyes went wide. The realization hit Emma like a landslide. Whatever had been buried under her family's land wasn't just rare, it was powerful and dangerous. Back inside the farmhouse, Charlie began sealing and labeling the samples. Emma stood at the window, watching the horizon, her heart thumping not with excitement, but with something closer to dread. That night, as Benji slept, Emma sat cross-legged on the living room rug, her laptop open and dozens of browser tabs cluttering the screen. Next to her, Maggie Brooks sipped tea and thumbed through a tattered copy of Colorado State mineral rights law. This section, Maggie said, tapping a highlighted paragraph, is what you need to understand. Colorado's mineral rights law is split estate. Surface and mineral rights can be severed. But unless someone previously registered a mineral claim, and unless that claim was grandfathered in, Emma squinted. Then the mineral rights belong to the current landowner. Exactly, Maggie said, and I ran a preliminary title search through the county records. There's no indication anyone ever filed a separate mineral claim for your land. The estate transfer from your mother to you included all rights, surface and subsurface. Emma leaned back, her head spinning. So it's mine, she said slowly. Everything beneath the ground. Maggie nodded. Unless someone comes forward with older paperwork, you control the resource. Emma closed the laptop gently. But that also makes you a target. They didn't see the footprints until the next morning. Charlie had returned early to organize the drilling equipment, but when he reached the third test site, something felt off. The tarps had been shifted, the portable generator had been unplugged, and there, in the soft mud around the site, were half a dozen boot prints. Not from his work boots, not Emma's, and definitely not Benji's. He knelt down, inspecting the impressions. Standard issue steel toe, probably work crew. But the depth of the heel marks meant whoever it was had been carrying something heavy, likely equipment. Charlie's face darkened. He followed the tracks until they vanished at the edge of the tree line near the old service road that hadn't been used in decades. Fresh tire marks told him everything he needed to know. Someone had been there during the night, someone who knew exactly where to look. Back at the house, Charlie found Emma in the kitchen, pouring coffee with trembling hands. They were here, he said without preamble. Last night. Emma's eyes widened. He laid out the photos he'd taken on his phone, the boot prints, the tire tracks, the disturbed tarp. They didn't take anything obvious, but they were scanning. I'd bet my last field notebook they had a spectrometer with them. Emma stared at the images, her face tight. They knew exactly where we drilled. Charlie nodded, which means either the property's being watched or someone on the inside is leaking information. Maggie, who had just walked in from the porch, overheard the last part. She set down her notepad slowly. Or both. Emma turned to her. What do you mean? I checked the property tax archive again this morning. A copy of your inheritance filing was accessed last week by a firm called Red Basin Holdings. They're a shell corporation tied to Sierra Minerals. My guess? They've been monitoring all land transfers in Stone Creek for years, just waiting for someone like you to kick up dust. Charlie grunted. And now they know exactly what's under your feet. Emma closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the counter. They weren't just facing a legal chess game anymore. Someone had physically stepped onto her land, at night, with equipment. They weren't bluffing. They were scouting. And if they were willing to come this close, they wouldn't stop at footprints. Emma opened her eyes, steel behind them now. They want to act in the dark? She looked toward the drill site, barely visible through the kitchen window. Then it's time we shine a light. Maggie Brooks had spent the better part of her career chasing buried truths. She had uncovered misfiled deeds, suppressed environmental reports, even political favors tucked beneath layers of bureaucracy. But what she stumbled upon now felt heavier. It had roots tangled deep in time, and consequences that could unspool decades of carefully maintained deception. After Charlie discovered signs of unauthorized trespass at Emma's drill site, Maggie's instincts flared. The aggression wasn't just territorial. It was strategic, precise. She believed it wasn't the first time Sierra Minerals had crossed the line, only the first time someone had pushed back. She started by digging into town records, searching for any indication that Emma's mother had ever taken legal action to protect the land. What she found was absence. An entire section of public complaints from the late 80s was missing, its place marked by vague catalog entries and digitized notations. But Maggie knew silence was never innocent. She followed the breadcrumb trail to the municipal server office. There, after a few hours with an old terminal and a guest password, Stone Creek 1980. She accessed a hidden folder containing a PDF scan of a long-forgotten petition filed by Eliza Callahan in 1987. The document was a formal complaint addressed to the State Office of Mineral Resources, arguing against Sierra Minerals' application for exploratory drilling. The language was clear and assertive. Claims of unauthorized geological activity, data falsification, and unpermitted excavation on private land. The most haunting line, however, came near the end. Eliza had written, "I file this protest, knowing the risks, especially while carrying my first child." Attached to the appeal was an internal memo from Sierra Minerals, dated days earlier. It referenced a newly identified spodumene-rich pegmatite formation on the border of the Callahan parcel. The memo bore the signature of a junior field analyst, Wyatt Harrington, who at the time was only 20 years old but already embedded in the family business. The implication was undeniable. Sierra had discovered the deposit long ago, and Wyatt had helped conceal it. Within a week of filing, Eliza had abruptly withdrawn her complaint. The rest had been erased, or so they thought. Maggie printed the documents and drove back to the farmhouse with a heaviness in her chest. When she laid them out on the kitchen table, neither Emma nor Charlie spoke for a long while. The pages carried the weight of betrayal across generations. It wasn't just that Sierra had lied, it was that they had bullied a pregnant woman into silence to secure what they believed was rightfully theirs. Emma stared at the page containing her mother's signature. She traced her finger along the ink, as if trying to feel the intent behind it. Her expression didn't show shock, only painful recognition. She began to understand why her mother had never spoken about the land's potential, why the topic had always shifted to family, to love, to duty, never wealth. Eliza had chosen protection over confrontation, believing that silence would shield the next generation. But silence, Emma realized, had only delayed the storm. Maggie suggested they wait before releasing the documents. The timing mattered. If they went public too soon, Sierra could bury them in legal noise and dismiss the records as outdated grievances. They needed to gather more, tie the past to the present, show the continuity of deceit. Meanwhile, Charlie reviewed the technical details in the report. The mineral signatures described in 1987 matched perfectly with their recent findings. That meant Sierra likely retained older surveys, perhaps even more detailed than what Charlie had managed with limited tools. It also meant that Sierra's sudden interest in Emma's land wasn't speculative. It was re-engagement with a known resource. Over the next 2 days, Maggie began triangulating names from the archived memo, including retired engineers and former Sierra contractors. One lead confirmed that Wyatt had been sent to Stone Creek as part of a compliance audit back in the summer of '87, though no official audit records had ever been released. She also discovered that the land originally surrounding the Callahan farm had once belonged to multiple families who had either sold or lost their properties in the late '80s under suspicious foreclosure conditions. Emma spent long evenings reading her mother's old letters, the ones tucked away in a wooden box under a loose floorboard in the pantry. Most were gentle reminders about chores or memories of her father, but a few held darker undertones, references to phone calls with no voices, tire tracks near the barn in the morning, lights in the orchard that no one could explain. One note, never sent, simply read, "If she grows up strong, tell her the truth was always worth protecting." Emma folded the paper carefully, her hands steady. That night, she stood alone outside near the third drill site, eyes on the hills beyond her property. The cold cut through her coat, but she didn't move. Something had changed. This wasn't just about holding on to land anymore. It was about reclaiming a legacy someone had tried to bury long before she ever arrived. They would come again, that much was certain, but this time she wouldn't be alone. And this time she would not be silent. The letter arrived on a cold Wednesday morning, tucked in a plain white envelope with the Colorado Department of Environmental Oversight insignia printed in faint gray in the upper corner. Emma opened it on the porch steps, with one hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, its contents long since gone cold. The wording inside was sterile, bureaucratic, and deliberately vague. Pursuant to State Code 47C, your property located at 1127 Elk Hollow Road has been selected for a precautionary environmental risk assessment. This routine evaluation will include on-site inspections to assess any potential soil and groundwater contaminants as related to historic land use. Emma read it twice before setting it down on the porch railing. It was the kind of language designed to sound harmless, routine, non-threatening. But after everything she had uncovered in recent weeks, the hidden mineral wealth, her mother's suppressed complaint, Sierra Minerals' aggressive interest, she felt the weight behind the words. By noon, a white truck bearing state seals pulled up to the edge of her property. Behind it, a flatbed trailer followed, hauling several large metallic cases and a mobile drill rig that groaned with industrial intent. The vehicles stopped just outside the gate, idling loudly, the driver making no move to approach the house. Instead, he parked sideways across the narrow gravel driveway, effectively blocking all access in or out. Charlie arrived 20 minutes later in his battered Jeep, frowning as he maneuvered around the blockade. "That's not state protocol," he said, climbing out. "They're not supposed to obstruct property access unless there's a safety hazard." "They're not here for safety," Emma replied, her voice low. Together they approached the lead technician, a man in a neon vest who introduced himself only as contracted through the agency and declined to provide further details. He handed Emma another letter, this one a formal notice of on-site testing, to begin the following morning, along with a disclaimer about the possibility of ground penetration sensors. "Your cooperation is appreciated," the man said without expression. The next day, just after sunrise, Emma noticed a black Lincoln parked at the edge of the road, too clean, too quiet to belong to anyone in Stone Creek. As she stepped off the porch, the driver's door opened. Wyatt Harrington emerged, flanked by a man in a tailored navy suit with a leather-bound folder tucked under one arm. "Ms. Callahan," Wyatt greeted her, his tone polished but colder than in their last encounter. "May we speak?" Emma didn't answer, only stepped aside and gestured to the porch. Wyatt didn't sit. He stood at the railing, eyes scanning the property as if calculating its every square foot. "I understand this sudden environmental inspection must feel inconvenient," he said finally, "but state agencies often act unpredictably, don't they?" "You mean after a nudge from Sierra Minerals?" Emma asked, her arms crossed. Wyatt gave a thin smile. The lawyer stepped forward. "We represent parties with mutual interest in minimizing conflict. Mr. Harrington is prepared to offer a resolution." The offer was written on a single sheet of paper, $250,000 in exchange for full mineral rights and a permanent confidentiality agreement. Emma took the paper, scanned it silently, and let it hang at her side. "That's 10 times your last offer," she said flatly. "It's the last offer you'll get," Wyatt said, a chill creeping into his voice. Emma didn't answer. She reached into her pocket and pressed the small recorder she had hidden earlier, ensuring every word was preserved. Then she folded the paper and placed it back in the lawyer's folder. "This land belonged to my family long before your father schemed to take it. You won't get it now just because you're offering cash instead of coercion." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Be careful, Ms. Callahan. There are limits to how long you can resist this kind of pressure. Not everything that comes next will arrive in an envelope." The veiled threat hung in the air as the men turned and left, their tires spitting gravel on the way out. Later that evening, Charlie returned from checking the sensor stations they had placed near the drill sites. His face was unusually pale. "One of the units was tampered with," he said, deliberately. "Someone accessed the data module and replaced it. Sloppy job, but not amateur." Emma examined the device herself. The seal was broken, the data wiped and replaced with a blank diagnostic file. Only someone with knowledge of the system would know where to look. Whoever had done this hadn't been searching. They had known exactly what to erase. "They're not just watching us," Charlie said grimly. "They're running their own surveys behind our backs." Emma felt her pulse rise, but her expression remained steady. Then it's time we make sure we're the ones writing the story. That night, she emailed Maggie everything: the tampered sensor logs, the recording of Wyatt's offer, the list of serial numbers from the equipment parked at her gate. Then she opened the tattered journal her mother had left behind and stared at the line she'd read 100 times already. Truth doesn't fight. It waits. The truth, she realized, was done waiting. The storm passed just after midnight, leaving behind a silence thick with the smell of damp wood and unsettled earth. Emma lay awake on the living room couch, one hand resting on the worn leather journal her mother had once kept hidden from the world and from her. It had been 2 days since she'd pulled it from the false bottom of the old floorboard beneath the kitchen sink, tucked carefully inside a cedar box, sealed with time and intention. She hadn't opened it right away. Part of her had been afraid of what she'd find, afraid the contents might confirm what the town whispered, what the Harringtons implied, or worse, what she had started to suspect, that her mother had known about the mine, about the land, and had still chosen silence. But tonight, something inside Emma shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the pressure, the sense of being hunted, and her back pressed so firmly to the wall there was no place left to retreat. Or maybe it was the memory of her son's voice earlier that day, asking her why she looked angrier when she smiled now. She opened the journal. The first few entries were what she expected: simple reflections, descriptions of rainfall, musings about wildflowers and crop rotations. Her mother had always been a private woman, more comfortable in the garden than in conversation. But as Emma flipped past the early pages, the tone changed. The writing grew sharper. Dates began to align with moments in Emma's childhood she remembered as tense, but hadn't fully understood at the time. June 1987. Received another letter from Sierra. They want to test the South Acres again. Claimed it's for soil fertility studies this time. The same lie, different stationery. July 1987. The man from the county office visited again, asked strange questions. He didn't know I still had the geological report from '86. Of course I do. I remember everything your grandfather taught me about that soil. There's something in it, something they want badly enough to twist the law. Emma's breath caught. The next page was dated the week her mother had taken her to Boulder for a quick vacation, a trip she now realized was meant to get them away during a particularly heated negotiation. They'll never stop, I know that now, but I can't give them the land. I won't. Not even for you, Emma. Especially not for you. As the hours passed and the storm's residue turned to morning fog outside, Emma read every page. Every doubt, every fear, every moment her mother had considered giving up, then hadn't. Her mother hadn't been naive. She'd been strategic. She had known the cost of standing firm, had paid it in silence and isolation, and still chose to hold her ground. Toward the back of the journal, a folded sheet of yellowed paper had been tucked between 2 pages. It wasn't an entry. It was a letter, unfinished, never mailed. To my dearest Emma, you are 10 years old as I write this, and already more curious and bright than I could have hoped for. There are things I wish I could explain to you now, but the world is still too complicated for that. You'll understand one day. You may hear stories, you may even find papers or maps. And when you do, you'll face the choice I faced too young, between what the world offers and what your conscience demands. Sometimes that choice will look like money. Sometimes it will look like silence. I hope, when it comes, you will remember who you are, and who we were. There is more in the earth than minerals, my love. There is memory. There is justice. There is truth. Love always, Mom. Emma pressed the paper to her chest. The tears came slowly and then all at once. It wasn't just a journal. It was a blueprint, a testimony. Her mother had seen the trap and made her stand not by shouting, but by waiting. Waiting for someone who would finish what she couldn't. By sunrise, Emma had made her decision. She drove into Denver that afternoon and sat across from a land use attorney named Thomas Grady, a sharp-witted, steel-eyed man with a background in mining litigation and a reputation for being as relentless as the mountain winters. Maggie had referred him, and she had not exaggerated his tenacity. "You're sitting on something big, Ms. Callahan," he said after skimming the summary Emma provided, his eyes narrowing behind silver-framed glasses. "And if you want to protect it, you'll need more than principle. You'll need paperwork." Emma slid the journal across the table, opened to the page with her mother's first mention of Sierra's covert surveys. "I've got that too," she said. Grady smiled slowly, tapping a pen against the desk. "Then let's make sure the people who tried to bury this land under threats and lies get to see it from the other side, for once." By nightfall, Emma was back at the farmhouse, standing on the porch under a sky, burning with orange and lavender streaks. The air was sharp, clean, and though the fear hadn't left her, it had changed. It was no longer the fear of being overwhelmed. It was the fear of letting her mother down, of walking away when the road had already been carved by someone who had carried the burden alone for decades. Inside, she made a pot of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and began organizing every document she had. Charlie's sensor logs, Maggie's digital archives, the journal pages, the letter. She was no longer just defending a property, she was defending a legacy. Behind the tinted windows of a high-rise boardroom in downtown Denver, Wyatt Harrington stood before a projection screen, his reflection distorted in the glass overlooking the city. The room was dim, sterile, and suffocatingly quiet, exactly how he preferred it during meetings of this nature. Around the mahogany table sat 10 members of Sierra Minerals' executive board, each selected as much for loyalty as for expertise. "This is not public knowledge," Wyatt began, voice low but resonant. "What I'm about to share stays in this room." He clicked the remote, and the screen flickered to life with a topographic rendering of Stone Creek Valley. The area was marked with red circles, blue elevation lines, and several glowing indicators that pulsed over a specific cluster of acreage, Emma Callahan's land. "As you know, we've been developing the Raven Ridge Initiative for over 2 years. The planned southern pipeline corridor requires unbroken land rights from here," he gestured at the screen, "to our logistics hub in Monument Pass. Unfortunately, a new variable has entered the equation." He clicked again. A satellite image zoomed in on Emma's property, now labeled Parcel E-72. The annotated slide showed mineral scans, layered soil analysis, and a discrete note, lithium-tantalum anomalies confirmed. Wyatt cleared his throat and continued. "Our internal surveys confirm a viable deposit under Parcel E-72. However, we failed to acquire the parcel before it was auctioned. It now belongs to a civilian, Emma Callahan, who has refused multiple offers." Murmurs rose among the board members. "So, what's the backup?" asked a man with a thick neck and thinning hair, Robert Kane, longtime investor and quietly feared bulldog of the finance committee. Wyatt didn't flinch. "We don't need to own her land to neutralize it." He advanced to the next slide, a seismic stability overlay map with exaggerated tremor zones traced in orange. "We've recently purchased 2 adjacent parcels for strategic redirection. Our consultants, Midland Geo-Environmental, are preparing a safety assessment report that will cast serious doubt on the structural integrity of Parcel E-72. If we can demonstrate geological instability, we can request a state-ordered freeze on her development rights. Temporarily, of course." There was a beat of silence. "That's not a guarantee," Kane warned. "What if it doesn't hold up?" Wyatt's tone turned cold. "It doesn't need to hold up. It just needs to stall her. Long enough for us to reroute and extract from beneath the eastern shelf where the deposit overlaps into our new acquisition." "And the board?" asked another voice from the corner. "The annual report doesn't reflect this." "Because it doesn't exist, formally," Wyatt snapped. "This operation is an asset redirection maneuver tied to proprietary environmental reassessments. You'll all get your quarterly targets, but I need discretion, and I need it now." The vote was unanimous. Meanwhile, back in Stone Creek, Emma sat at her dining table, the surface cluttered with legal pads, printouts, and Charlie Foster's drilling data. She'd spent the better part of the day coordinating with Thomas Grady, her attorney in Denver, and reviewing local codes on mineral rights. Maggie had just stepped out for a call when Benji returned from school with a sealed envelope in his backpack, addressed to Ms. Emma Callahan, property owner. Emma opened it cautiously. It was a formal notice from the Colorado Department of Geological Integrity, citing concerns about potential subterranean instability on Parcel E-72, and ordering an immediate suspension of all land-disturbing activities, including drilling, trenching, and mineral sampling. The source of the alert was listed as a third-party environmental consultant, Midland Geo-Environmental. Emma's pulse quickened. She stood, walked out to the porch, and called Charlie. Within minutes, he arrived, dusty and winded, holding a field journal and a skeptical look. "They're trying to stall you," he muttered after reading the letter. "There's no seismic risk here. I've run stability tests myself. Their report, if it even exists, is either fabricated or wildly exaggerated." Maggie returned just as Charlie finished. "I've heard of Midland Geo-Environmental," she said, pulling up her phone. "They've filed favorable reports for Sierra Minerals before, usually when a land dispute's involved." Emma clenched the letter tightly. "They're trying to stop us in our tracks, delay the drilling, halt momentum, undermine credibility." Charlie nodded. "And in the meantime, they'll be testing from adjacent land, drawing out whatever they can, probably hoping you'll get scared and sell." Emma exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Then we don't give them time. We push back. Legally, publicly, loudly." Maggie was already dialing. "I'll call Grady. He'll file an injunction first thing in the morning." Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping the last of the autumn leaves across the gravel driveway, like whispers of the land itself trying to warn her. Emma didn't need warnings anymore. She needed resolve. Whatever game Wyatt Harrington thought he was playing, she wasn't planning to fold. The hearing room at the Colorado State Resource Commission building buzzed with tension long before the meeting was called to order. It wasn't the usual sleepy subcommittee session. Journalists hovered along the back wall, flipping open notebooks and checking microphones. Staffers from the Attorney General's office whispered behind laptops. Lawyers from rival firms paced near the windows. The air itself seemed to hum with the pressure of something about to break. Emma Callahan sat in the front row, hands clenched in her lap. To her left was Maggie Brooks, eyes sharp behind her glasses, and to her right, Thomas Grady, her land use attorney from Denver, who had, in the past week, become more like a wartime strategist than legal counsel. Charlie Foster sat one row back, thick binder on his lap, nodding silently to himself like a soldier reviewing a final battle plan. At exactly 10 a.m., the commissioners entered, took their seats at the elevated dais, and called the emergency hearing to order. A nameplate read, "Commissioner Denise Alcott, Chair." She rapped her gavel and began. "This emergency session is now in progress to address the environmental stop order issued on Parcel E-72, Stone Creek County, and the subsequent appeal filed by landowner Emma Callahan. Parties may proceed with opening statements." Grady stood first. "Madam Chair, we contend the stop order was issued on the basis of manipulated data from a compromised third-party contractor employed indirectly by Sierra Minerals Corporation. We intend to present evidence, including technical analyses, internal communications, and an audio recording that suggests corporate interference in state oversight." A murmur rippled through the room. The chair nodded. "Proceed." Maggie was the first to take the floor. She moved confidently, flipping open her laptop and connecting it to the commission's display system. A waveform appeared on the monitor, and a clear voice filled the chamber. Wyatt Harrington's voice. "You have no idea what you're sitting on, Ms. Callahan. Walk away now, and no one needs to know this ever happened. We'll make it worth your while, $250,000 under the table. But this land, it's not your future, it's your liability." The clip ended. The silence afterward was deafening. Maggie turned to the commissioners. "That recording was captured on Ms. Callahan's property 3 weeks ago. We verified its authenticity through 2 independent forensic audio labs. The voice is unmistakably Mr. Harrington's. The intent, to suppress geological information and manipulate land acquisition, is equally clear." Commissioner Alcott leaned forward. "Do you have supporting evidence for your claim that the environmental reports were falsified?" Charlie Foster stood now, gray-haired and deliberate. "Yes, Madam Chair. I've submitted a geotechnical assessment conducted with state-certified equipment and verified methodology. Our core samples show 0 instability, no risk of subsidence, and no fault line activity. This report contradicts Midland Geo-Environmental's findings entirely." He passed out printed copies of the report, each page marked with timestamps, GPS coordinates, and photographic documentation. Grady added, "Furthermore, Midland Geo-Environmental has a documented financial relationship with Sierra Minerals, despite their claim of independence. We've obtained tax filings that show consulting payments routed through a shell entity. This calls into question the entire basis for the stop order. Commissioner Alcott nodded to a clerk, who began entering the new documentation into evidence. Just as the momentum appeared to tilt fully in Emma's favor, the doors at the rear of the hearing room swung open. Wyatt Harrington entered, flanked by his corporate attorney Gregory Downs and a pair of aides in dark suits. His expression was unreadable, calm, almost smug, as he walked to the designated respondents' table and requested to speak. "Madam Chair," he began, "this has clearly spiraled into a personal campaign against Sierra Minerals. I categorically deny any wrongdoing. The voice on that recording may sound like mine, but I've had no direct contact with Ms. Callahan beyond a standard offer. And Midland Geo-Environmental was contracted independently by our logistics division for unrelated assessments. Any overlap is purely coincidental." Gasps and whispers flitted through the audience. Emma kept her gaze fixed on him, her jaw tight, heart pounding. Wyatt turned slightly, addressing the panel. "I urge the Commission to consider that this hearing has become a platform for emotional manipulation and hearsay, rather than a legitimate review of geological safety." Before the commissioners could respond, a woman rose from the back of the room. She was in her 50s, wearing a gray blazer and a lanyard, identifying her as a registered public speaker. Her presence hadn't been noted before, but as she walked forward, eyes began to widen across the room. "Madam Chair, may I speak?" she asked calmly. Alcott hesitated. "And you are?" "My name is Renee Dalton. I worked for Sierra Minerals for 16 years. I was part of the internal team that reviewed land survey data from Stone Creek Valley in 1987, and again in 2021. The room went silent. Wyatt shifted in his seat for the first time, eyes narrowing. "I have copies of internal memos," Renee continued, lifting a brown file folder from her bag. "They show that Sierra Minerals had confirmed lithium and tantalum anomalies in parcel E-72 as far back as 1987. Those memos were deliberately excluded from regulatory filings. I was ordered to redact them from public reports on direct instruction from then senior management. Last year, similar data was buried again." She handed the folder to a staff member who passed it to the commissioners. Wyatt stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. She was terminated for violating—" "She resigned," Renee corrected, "after refusing to falsify a third seismic report. I have the emails, timestamps, and, thanks to Colorado's whistleblower laws, I'm well within my rights to disclose them here." The air turned electric. Alcott raised a hand. "That's enough for today. This commission will adjourn to review all evidence presented. A ruling will be delivered within 5 business days. Until then, the stop order on parcel E-72 is suspended pending further investigation." The gavel came down. The hearing was over. Emma exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Her knees weak, she turned to Maggie, who smiled through clenched teeth. Charlie clapped a hand on her shoulder, proud but cautious. Grady leaned in. "This just became bigger than your land, Emma. They're going to dig into everything now." She nodded. "Good. Let them. I've got nothing to hide." Behind them, Wyatt was already moving toward the exit, jaw locked, eyes burning. This wasn't the outcome he had expected, and it wasn't the last fight he'd face. The drive back to Stone Creek was long, quiet, and lined with thoughts Emma couldn't shake. The Denver hearing had ended with revelations, denials, and one unexpected voice of truth. But even with momentum shifting in her favor, she felt unease settle in her chest like a stone. She rolled down the window slightly, letting the wind cut through the silence. Her hands clenched the steering wheel tighter the closer she got to the ranch. When the property finally came into view, her breath caught. The front gate was hanging off its hinges, ripped from the post as if it had been rammed. Dust swirled where tire tracks cut deep into the dirt driveway. Emma slammed the brakes and leapt from the truck before it even fully stopped. Smoke, not fresh, but recent. She sprinted toward the barn, or what was left of it. The back half had collapsed, charred beams and metal siding twisted in the fading light. Her boots crunched over broken glass and blackened wood as she stepped inside the hollowed structure. The shelves where they had stored the core samples were empty. The case files and survey notes Charlie had labeled meticulously were gone. Everything had been ransacked, burned, or both. Heart pounding, she raced to the main house. She unlocked the side door with shaking hands and bolted straight to the kitchen pantry, pulling aside the false panel beneath the floorboards. The USB backups, the data drive, and high-res scans of Charlie's reports were still there. She cradled them for a long second, letting the relief wash over her. At least something had survived. That evening, Benji returned from school visibly shaken. He barely spoke through dinner, pushing mashed potatoes around his plate. Emma finally asked, "What happened today, sweetheart?" "There was a man outside school this morning," he whispered. "I saw him again when I walked home. He was in a truck, just watching. Didn't say anything. But he was there." Emma's spine went rigid. She hadn't told Benji everything, only what an 8-year-old needed to feel safe. But this was different. This was targeted. She made her decision that night. By 10 p.m., she was packing a small suitcase for Benji, pajamas, school books, his worn-out stuffed otter. He asked where they were going. "You're going to stay with Aunt Claire for a little while, baby," she said, keeping her tone light even as her chest tightened. "Just a few days. Boulder's not far and you love her cat, remember?" Benji nodded solemnly. Emma drove him in silence, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror more often than the road ahead. Claire opened the door in a robe and took one look at Emma's face before pulling both mother and son inside. No questions, just hugs and promises to keep him safe. Emma returned to Stone Creek alone. The ranch felt colder, darker. She barely had time to shower before her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered. "You should have taken the money, Ms. Callahan," came Wyatt Harrington's unmistakable voice, calm but dripping with veiled threat. "You're out of your depth. You've made enemies of people who don't forget. Either you sell or you disappear. Colorado has a way of burying things." She didn't respond. "This isn't a game anymore," he added. "Choose wisely." Emma hung up without a word. She sat in the dark for a long moment, staring at the silent phone in her hand. Her whole body trembled, but not from fear. Rage. Resolve. She walked to the kitchen table, where Charlie's last report sat, scorched around the edges but still readable. She opened her laptop and pulled up the encrypted cloud folder she had started with Maggie. Then she opened a new browser window and began emailing journalists, not just local ones, national investigative outlets, environmental forums. She attached documents, reports, samples of the audio file from Denver, the photos of the burned barn. No more hiding. If Wyatt Harrington wanted a war, he would get one. But this time, it wouldn't be in the shadows. This time, the whole country would be watching. It began with a headline that shook the very foundations of the Colorado mining world. Whistleblower, hidden maps, and the billion-dollar cover-up, the real story behind Sierra Minerals. The investigative report by the Denver Herald laid out in stark detail the years-long campaign by Sierra Minerals to suppress geological data, intimidate landowners, and manipulate regulatory processes in their effort to quietly secure access to one of the richest rare mineral deposits in the American West. The article, published with supporting documents provided by Maggie Brooks, Jackson Cooper, and Emma's legal team, went viral within hours. By sunset that same day, Sierra Minerals stock had lost over 40% of its value. National news outlets swarmed Stone Creek, and the pressure on the company's board reached a breaking point. An emergency shareholder meeting convened in Denver, and after hours of closed-door deliberation, the outcome was unanimous. Wyatt Harrington was removed as CEO. For Emma Callahan, the moment was surreal. Standing on the porch of the farmhouse that had once felt like a crumbling relic, she now looked over land whose value had never been just monetary. The soil beneath her feet held more than spodumene and tantalum. It held memory, resistance, and legacy. Within days, the state of Colorado issued a formal ruling recognizing Emma as the sole legal steward of the mineral rights beneath her land. The years-old ownership dispute, clouded by manipulated permits, backdoor deals, and missing documents, had finally been settled in her favor. But Emma wasn't interested in selling out. Not now. Not ever. Instead, she announced a groundbreaking partnership with an independent extraction consortium led by environmental engineers and community advocates. The deal, mediated by her new legal advisor from Denver, stipulated a 40% community reinvestment clause, an unprecedented provision in the regional mining sector. For every dollar made from the mineral harvest, nearly half would go toward public infrastructure, education, environmental monitoring, and rural health initiatives in Stone Creek and the surrounding counties. As part of that vision, Charlie Foster and Maggie Brooks, her trusted allies, were asked to spearhead the construction of the Stone Creek Geoscience and Environmental Center right on the edge of Emma's property. Designed as both a research hub and educational space, the center would host university students, local schools, and independent scientists alike. It was a place not just to study the Earth, but to learn how to protect it. On the morning of the center's groundbreaking, the townspeople gathered in a semicircle as Emma stepped forward. A new sign had been erected at the southern entrance of the property, its steel letters gleaming in the mountain light, Eliza Callahan Mine. There were no speeches, just quiet applause and the wind sweeping across the land like a breath finally exhaled. Later that day, Emma visited the edge of the old tree where Benji had found the shimmering stone months ago. She crouched beside the thick roots, now exposed from rain and time, and placed a small metal plaque into the soil. It read, "To those who came before, who believed in value unseen." Benji, watching from a short distance away, ran up with a jar full of polished stones he'd gathered from across the property. "Can we put these in the center?" he asked. "So kids know where everything started?" Emma smiled. "We'll make a whole exhibit, and we'll name it after you." The boy grinned and raced ahead toward the construction site where Charlie was explaining fault lines to a group of college interns. In that moment, the land no longer felt heavy with burden, but alive with possibility. That evening, under a sky burnished with orange and violet, Emma sat with Maggie, Charlie, and members of the new town council on the porch, sipping strong coffee and watching as floodlights illuminated the first steel beams of the center. The night was filled with quiet conversation about what came next, about keeping promises, about never letting profit outweigh principle. The past hadn't been erased, but it had been rewritten with truth, courage, and names that wouldn't be forgotten. And Emma, once a quiet librarian with no experience in farming or geology, had become something more, a guardian of legacy, a champion of justice, and a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary revolutions begin in the most ordinary places. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't let it end here. Because what happened to Emma Callahan in the hills of Stone Creek isn't just fiction. It's a reflection of a deeper truth, one about power, silence, and the courage it takes to stand your ground when the world tries to push you out. You see, there are real Emmas out there, real people who inherit dust-covered deeds, not fortunes, real families who hang on to their land not because it's easy, but because it's worth something more than a dollar sign. And when the wrong people show up with offers wrapped in threats, it's not always the courts or cameras that protect them. Sometimes it's the simple act of speaking up, of being seen, of not giving in. That's why we tell these stories, because maybe someone out there needs to hear this tonight, to be reminded that what you're standing on, what you're fighting for, is enough, that you're not invisible, that when the odds stack high and the voices get loud, you can still choose to hold your line, just like Emma did. So if you believe in stories like this, if you want more stories where justice fights back, where forgotten farms hold secrets that shake the powerful, and where ordinary people become something extraordinary, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below, tell us what this story meant to you, share it with someone who still believes truth deserves a voice. Because this channel isn't just about entertainment, it's about remembering, it's about legacy, it's about not letting them bury it twice. And if that resonates with you, then welcome home. There's more to come. We'll see you in the next story.